Hello everybody, I am NicoD. So today I am back with 5 different SBCs, so I'm going to compare all 5. So I made a choice of 5 of the most important SBCs that I've got. So we start with the Raspberry Pi 400. Why the 400 and not the 4? So the 400 has a little bit better SOC. So this is clocked to 1.8 GHz by default, while this is clocked to 1.5 GHz by default. And this has got a lot better cooling than this. This needs a heatsink, this needs a fan to be able to run it at high speeds. This doesn't need that, so that is why I choose this. But one thing I have to tell you, this keyboard is really bad. This really is the worst keyboard they could choose, and that is a pity, but the computer that is inside is pretty good. So that's the first one. Then the second is my all-time favorite. So this is the NanoPi M4 with an NVMe head, and I also have got an eMMC module over here of 32 gigabytes. So let me plug this back in. So this is my all-time favorite SBC. Why? Because it has done so much good for me. So I've used this as a main desktop for a long time. Now I bought a new PC, and of course my new PC is better than this, but this was better than my old PC. So my old PC could only output 1080p. So no 1440p or even 4K. So with this I could use it at 1440p in the desktop with my 4K display. So this was better than my old computer to use it as a desktop. So I could have chosen this. So this is the Station P1. This also has got the same SOC as this, so the RK3399. I could also have chosen the Pinebook Pro, but the Pinebook Pro is of course a laptop. I also have got that. I also have got the NanoPi M4 V2, but the NanoPi M4 V2 died, so this is what I choose for now. So then we can go to, let's do this. So the Odroid N2 Plus. So this is one of my most powerful boards. I could also have chosen this, so the NicoD 3. Both have got the same CPUs, but they don't have got the same SOC. So this is the A311D and this is the S922X, but they do perform the same. This is at 12 volts, this can be powered with 5 volts, so for that I like this one most when I go away. When I'm going on vacation I take this with me because this is very powerful and I can do some video editing on this. Even when it only has got 2 gigabytes of RAM, I use a swap space. It makes it a lot slower to edit and render, but well, it does work and it is a lot faster than the RK3399, and most important for me, it consumes a lot less than the RK3399. So faster and less consumption. So that is the Odroid N2 Plus and the NicoD 3. So next on the list will be this. So this is the smallest that I've got that is still powerful. So this is the Radxa Zero. I just reviewed this, so watch my full review video of that if you are interested. So this is a really nice SBC. So this has got USB 3, so full USB 3 over this port. So it can do 400 megabytes a second over the USB 3. That is awesome. It also has an SD card reader. It also has got an eMMC and it has got 4 gigabytes of RAM. So this is quite a potent beast while it is very small. This has got the Amlogic S905Y2. So that is an evolution of this. So this is the Odroid C2. So this has got the Amlogic S905. So this was the first S905. This has got an evolution of that. And also the next one that we will see is the last one. So this is the Odroid HC4. This has got the Amlogic S905X3. So also an evolution of this SOC. This is a little bit more powerful. This can run at 2.1 GHz overclocked and 1.9 GHz base clock, but Armbian clocks it at 2.1 GHz. So I've done my tests at the base clocks that Armbian uses. So this is at 2.1 GHz. This will be 1.8 GHz. I didn't test this, of course. The Odroid N2 Plus is also lightly overclocked to 2.4 GHz with the big cores and 2 GHz with the small cores. So that is it. So I'm going to show you the specs of these 5 boards. I'm going to tell you what is the difference between all 5. I'm going to show you some benchmarks. So all the benchmarks have been done with the same distro. So all have been done with Armbian Jammy current. So with the current kernel, but for the Amlogic boards that is 5.10 and for the other boards that is 5.15. So there is a difference between kernels, but otherwise everything is the same. So as you know, now the Raspberry Pi 400 and the Raspberry Pi 4 also work with Armbian. So I've built all the images myself, so you cannot download all these images yet. We will see to make them all available. That's everything I needed to tell you, so here we go! Of course, I did forget to mention a few things. So first off, thank you to Jim, who is helping me with the thumbnails and with the overall look for this video. So as you see, it looks a bit different than my other videos. I'm trying to step up a bit. And also, why did I choose these 5 boards? Because all 5 are very important in the ARM SBC market. I tried to choose them from the most important makers. So for example, the NanoPi M4 comes from Friendly Elec. The Odroids come from Hard Kernel, the Radxa 0 from Radxa of course, and Raspberry Pi from the Raspberry Pi Foundation. So 4 makers and 4 of the most important makers that there are. There is also Orange Pi. I don't like them that much. They make good boards, bad software. So let's quickly go over the specs. So first, the NanoPi M4, the stock is the RK3399. It has got 4 cores A53 at 1.4 GHz, can overclock to 1.5 GHz, and 2 cores A72 at 1.8 GHz, can be clocked to 2 GHz. Then the Odroid N2 Plus, so the Amlogic S922X. It has got 2 A53 cores at 2 GHz and 4 A73 cores at 2.4 GHz. So these are the most powerful cores that there are on this list. Then there is the Raspberry Pi 400 with the Broadcom BCM2711C0. So these are 4 cores A72 at 1.8 GHz. Then the Odroid HC4, the Amlogic S905X3. 4 cores A53 at 2.1 GHz. Normally it is 1.9 GHz, but in Armbian it is clocked to 2.1 GHz. And then the Radxa 0 Amlogic S905Y2, 4 times A53 cores at 1.8 GHz. The GPU for the M4 is a Mali T860 MP4. N2 Plus has the Mali G52 MP4. Then the Raspberry Pi has Video Core 6, Odroid HC4 has Mali G31 MP2, and the Radxa 0 has Mali G31 MP2. The M4 can have 2 GB or 4 GB LPDDR3, but the version 4 has got LPDDR4, and most other RK3399s have got LPDDR4. Odroid N2 Plus also 2 or 4 GB DDR4. Then Raspberry Pi, this has got the most choices. So there is a 1 GB version, 2 GB, 4 GB and 8 GB for the Raspberry Pi 4, not for the 400, but the 400 is also in 1, 2 and 4 GB. The HC4 has got 4 GB DDR4. Then the Radxa 0 can also be bought with 1 GB, 2 GB or 4 GB LPDDR4. All of them have got gigabit Ethernet except the Radxa 0. Both Odroids don't have Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, the others do have it. The NanoPi M4 has got great USBs, so 2 times 2 USB 3, so there are 2 USB 3 controllers. One for the left ports and one for the ports on the right. With the Odroid N2 Plus, this is its biggest problem. So the 4x USB 3 all over one controller, and it isn't a great controller, and it also has got micro USB on the back. Raspberry Pi 400 has 2 USB 3 ports and 1 USB 2 port. Odroid HC4 only has got 1 USB 2 port, and the Radxa Zero has got USB-C at USB 3 speeds. All of them have got an SD card reader. The NanoPi M4 can have an eMMC up to 64GB, for the N2 Plus up to 128GB. The Raspberry Pi 400 and the HC4 do not have eMMC, and the Radxa Zero also can have an eMMC up to 128GB. The NanoPi M4 also has got the PCI Express over GPIOs. It also has got the 40-pin GPIO header. It also has got UART. The N2 Plus also has got GPIOs and UART. Raspberry Pi 400's UART and GPIOs. Odroid HC4 has got 2x SATA. So this is what makes this Odroid HC4 so great. And then the Radxa Zero has got GPIOs, but nothing more. Then the audio you can read. And then the power. So for the NanoPi M4 it is only 5 volts. For the Odroid N2 Plus it is 12 volts with a barrel jack. The Raspberry Pi 400, this is special. This needs 5.3 volts to work well. If you deliver 5 volts then it will not work well. This is a known Raspberry Pi characteristic that I really hate. You can't power it with normal power banks. Odroid HC4 is 15 volts. This so it can power full-sized hard drives. And the Radxa Zero is 5 volt over USB-C. The NanoPi M4 is the only one that has got MIPI CSI and MIPI DSI. So first off we are gonna begin with what they are good for. So first, desktop, this is in Linux of course. So desktop tasks in Linux, for that we need good GPU drivers. And also video playback is very important for this. So this is my own opinion. You can have another opinion, but I'm just saying that this is what I think about it. So first, the NanoPi M4 is my favorite desktop ARM SBC. This is because it has got an NVMe head, so I can use a swap file to increase my usable memory. Mine only has got 2GB of RAM, but I don't care since I've got my swap file on NVMe. So the second is the Raspberry Pi 400. So if you use Raspberry Pi OS, then this is a pretty good desktop experience. You can also connect 2 displays to it, so for that it is pretty good. So on spot number 3 is the Odroid N2 Plus. This is here because it has got a very powerful CPU, but the GPU drivers ain't that good. Video playback ain't great, but it can do it with the CPU alone. So you can watch 1080p video, but it ain't perfect. Then on spot number 4 is the Odroid HC4. Why the HC4? Because it is a little bit more powerful than the Radxa Zero, and it is pretty well supported. There are a lot of images to find for it. Then as last, for desktop tasks, the Radxa Zero, it is still pretty good at it. Mine has got 4GB of RAM, and it has got an eMMC, so it is plenty fast enough. The biggest advantage for the Radxa Zero is that it consumes next to nothing, so if you run it on batteries or power bank, then the Radxa Zero can be on spot number 1. But this is the choice that I made. Then for gaming on Linux, so again NanoPi M4 is my favorite for this. It is more powerful than the Raspberry Pi 400, and it has got great software for it. There is Twister OS, which has got everything pre-installed. But I like to make my own ambient images with everything installed. Then on spot number 2, again the Raspberry Pi 400. It has got good support and it is pretty fast. Then on 3, again the Odroid N2 Plus. It now has got GPU drivers, but they don't perform very well. So the NanoPi M4 outperforms the Odroid N2 Plus in gaming on Linux. And then I've got the Radxa Zero and the Odroid HC4 at an Execo. The Radxa Zero is again better if you want to run it on batteries, so certainly if you want to make your own handhelds, then the Radxa Zero is the best choice for it. It is more powerful than the Odroid Go Super, and the Odroid HC4 is pretty much the same. Then gaming emulation. So for that, for example, RetroPie is used, or Emulation, or Android. So for that I will say the Odroid N2 Plus is my favorite. I use it for gaming with Emulation, and it runs really great. It runs better than on the NanoPi M4, and it runs better than the Raspberry Pi 400, because the Odroid N2 Plus is more powerful. So for that, the Odroid N2 Plus comes at spot number 1, then on spot number 2 the Raspberry Pi 400. It has got a lot of software, so RetroPie for example, but a lot more. Then the NanoPi M4, it is pretty potent for this, but it doesn't have got that much software for gaming. Then the Radxa Zero, this is pretty good, again if you want to run it on batteries, then it comes to spot number 1. And the Odroid HC4 is still good for this. I have used it in the past for gaming. Also with Emulation, it runs pretty well on it. Then for a NAS, of course the Odroid HC4 does this best. It is made for it. It has got 2 full SATA ports and also power for full HDDs and also for 2.5-inch drives. Then at spot number 2 the NanoPi M4. This can have a SATA head for 4 SATA ports, so it is about perfect for a NAS, and you can also use the USB 3 for it. Then the Raspberry Pi 400, it isn't good for a NAS, but it is on the list. Then the Raspberry Pi Zero, it isn't perfect for a NAS, but it does have got USB 3, so it is at the 4th place, and at the last place the Odroid N2 Plus. This is really awful for a NAS. It only has got USB 3, but the problem is that the USB 3 ports are not that stable. There are problems with the power supply on the USB ports, and all 4 the ports go over one controller. So that brings the Odroid N2 Plus on the last place. Then IoT, of course the Radxa Zero will come at the 1st place. It is pretty small, it can be run on power banks. It only consumes 0.3 amps with all cores maxed out, with nothing else connected. So that is pretty crazy for the performance it can have. You can connect a USB camera to it, but there is no camera port on it. Then on the 2nd place the NanoPi M4. It has got everything it needs, but it does consume a lot. So you can connect an extra display with DPI, and you can also connect a camera with CSI. Then on 3rd place the Odroid N2 Plus. It ain't great for it, but it is on here. Then the Raspberry Pi 400. It ain't great for it either. It does have got some GPIOs at the back, but I wouldn't use it for this goal. And then the Odroid HC4. Of course it is made for IoT. Then a light server. Again the NanoPi M4 at the 1st spot for me, because it is so versatile. It is powerful, and it has got all the extra options with the PCIe over GPIOs. So then at spot number 2 I will say the Odroid N2 Plus, because it is this powerful and it has got gigabit Ethernet. If you don't need to use the USB port, then this is a great option for you. The Odroid HC4 comes at spot number 3. Having the storage option is a very good thing for a light server. Then the Raspberry Pi 400, it ain't great for it, and the Radxa Zero, it also ain't great for a light server, but it could do it if you really wanted it. Then video playback in Linux. For me, I set the NanoPi M4 at spot number 1, because I've got a very good Armbian image with the legacy kernel, with the media framework installed, and this makes use of the VPU for video playback, so to play video files in Linux. And it also does video playback in a browser pretty good, so that is why the NanoPi M4 is at spot number 1. Then the Raspberry Pi 400. For that you will need Raspberry Pi OS, so not Armbian. Then the Odroid N2 Plus at spot number 3. And then the Radxa Zero and HC4 at spot number 4. They are equal at it. Then video playback with others, so that is in Android or Core Elec. Then of course the Odroid N2 Plus does this best. This can do 4K video playback. I don't know about the Raspberry Pi 400. I didn't test this, but I put it at spot number 2. Then the NanoPi M4, there ain't no good Android images for it, just the Android image from Friendly Elec, and that's an old one, but there is Core Elec for it. Then the Odroid HC4, again with Core Elec, and then the Radxa 0. The quality of software, so this means how much software is there and how good is it. So for that we will have to choose the Raspberry Pi 400 at spot number 1. Just because the Raspberry Pi community is the biggest and there are tons of images to download, and now even Android for the Raspberry Pi. Then at spot number 2, the NanoPi M4. It has got Armbian and almost everything works in Armbian. We can have VPU acceleration with legacy kernel, we can have GPU acceleration with mainline kernel, and the VPU driver is also coming to mainline kernel. So in a few months this should also work with the NanoPi M4 in mainline with VPU and GPU acceleration. Then the Odroid N2 Plus at spot number 3 for quality of software. It has got tons of software, all to be found on the Odroid forum, so you have to search a bit to find the correct software, but it is all available, everything you want for it. Then the Odroid HC4, this also has got everything it needs, gaming images, Android images, and good Linux images. And then the Radxa 0 at spot number 5. It also has got everything it needs, but it is the newest of all these, so it doesn't have as much software. But it has got good Android images, it has got great Manjaro images, it now also will have Armbian images if we find a maintainer, so this is important. Radxa can again be supported by Armbian if we find maintainers for the boards. So please become a board maintainer at Armbian. I am also a board maintainer, so every help we can get is welcome. Then the CPU performance, of course the Odroid N2 Plus comes at spot number 1, then the NanoPi M4, then the Raspberry Pi 400 if you overclock it to 2 GHz, what is possible. Then the Odroid HC4, it is clocked to 2.1 GHz and it performs a bit better than the Radxa 0, so the Radxa 0 at spot number 5. Then the power consumption, for that the Radxa 0 is at spot number 1. It consumes next to nothing, as I said many times before. Then the Odroid N2 Plus, it also consumes very little for being so powerful. It consumes less than a NanoPi M4, while being a lot more powerful. Then the Raspberry Pi 400, it doesn't consume that much. Then the NanoPi M4, this does consume a lot more, but it is the most versatile of them all otherwise. And then at the last spot, the Odroid HC4, if you run full hard drives in it, what you should do because it's made for it, then it can consume a lot. So I've got 2 full hard drives in it and it consumes a bit more than 30 watts. If we then add all these numbers together per board, then we come at these scores. So the least points is the winner of the NicoD opinion benchmark. So the NanoPi M4 comes at first place with 22 points, the Odroid N2 Plus at second place with 27 points, its CPU did save it. Then the Raspberry Pi 400 at third place with 28 points, very close to the Odroid N2 Plus. And then the Radxa 0 and the Odroid HC4 both have got 43 points. So both ain't that versatile, but they are very good at what they are made for. So the Radxa 0 is great to power with a power bank, the Odroid HC4 is great to use as an NAS, but they are just not as versatile as the NanoPi M4 for example. And here the results of the NicoD Blender benchmark. So the Odroid N2 Plus did this in 5 minutes and 54 seconds, so this is very fast. It is a new version of Blender, so Blender 3.0.1. So that makes it a lot faster than it used to be. The NanoPi M4 did this in 9 minutes and 50 seconds, while the Raspberry Pi 400 did it in 13 minutes and 15 seconds. Then the Radxa 0 in 16 minutes and 5 seconds, and the Odroid HC4 in 16 minutes and 35 seconds. I don't know why the Odroid HC4 did this slower than the Radxa 0, it should be faster, but well, these are the results. then the 7-zip single core performance benchmark, and of course again the Odroid N2 Plus does this best with 2646 for the big cores and 1818 for the small cores. And all cores it has got 11801. That is not that far from my old PC. NanoPi M4 comes at the second place. So the big cores 1929, the small cores 1317. So these can be overclocked, but then it will consume a lot more. Then the Raspberry Pi 400, this can also be overclocked to 2 GHz. Then it will get a score of about 2000. And the all-cores score will also be better, of course. About 8000 for that when it is overclocked. The Odroid HC4 performs very well here. So 2008 for the small cores A55 and 7350 all-cores. And then the Radxa 0 has the lowest single core performance with 1634 and an all-core score of 6014. I must say the all-cores scores ain't that useful. It isn't always using 100% of all cores. So that is why I only look at the single core performance with 7-zip. And then as last the transfer speeds. So the SD card reader for the NanoPi M4 and the Odroid N2 Plus perform about the same. The Raspberry Pi 400 performs okay, but not great. The HC4 has got a slow SD card reader, and the Radxa 0 also has got a pretty slow SD card reader. The USB 3 is pretty fast on the M4. For the N2 Plus this is pretty slow with the write speeds. Raspberry Pi does it well. Odroid HC4 has got SATA and it is above 400 megabytes a second, but I did not test this. My test SATA SSD died, so I can't test it anymore. And then the Radxa 0 even performed a little bit over 400 megabytes a second, so this has got the best USB 3 port of all. The M4 is the only one with PCI Express, so this performs pretty well. It can do up to 700 megabytes a second with a very good NVMe drive. I am now using one of my worst NVMe drives, because my bests are in my PC now. And also the eMMCs perform pretty much the same over all boards. So that is it for today. I hope I didn't miss anything. There is a lot of information. This video is already very long, so I will not make it any longer. So thank you all for watching. Please subscribe to my channel and like the video. That helps me a lot. So thank you all for watching. See you all later. Bye.